PTG for the final day. So we can directly get started with the first topic. It is added by Tushar regarding the reset state robustification, which he's been working on past 2-3 cycles, and he would like to get that reviewed. So Tushar, if you're around.
Hi everyone. Actually, I add this topic as a reminder for this cycle. We discussed this past month before the feature freeze. And the team decided that we should postpone this in this next cycle. Just as a reminder, I added this. I already pushed the code in the review.
Tushar, are you saying something like you are not audible as of now? Yeah, I heard what you said, but after that.
I already put total 5 patches on this work. All of them are under review. One is major, other are under review. I don't know the reminder, but this patch, this cycle, because we are already discussed this so many times, I think we have to discuss it. But still, I will Wikipage also for more information if you would like to see.
I think there was a lot of noise, but what I gathered was like Tushar wanted this series to get reviewed, which had 5 patches as of now. And in the last cycle, we postponed some features and some drivers as well, which were not ready at the time. And this one was a big patch series as well. So this cycle we can prioritize that for the first and second milestone. Is that correct, Tushar?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we will keep that in mind. I will just add action as well. Sir, can you also link the patch series you have in the Etherpad only? So is there anything else you would like to discuss regarding this?
No, we could basically already discussed and according to that all code are pushed. Doesn't really want to discuss, but in the review side because it takes a lot of time to also review.
Okay, then I guess we can just focus on the reviews.
I'm sorry, I'm like just waking up. Is there a link to the I saw the link to the wiki page, but is there like a topic for this that we could just pull them or?
Yeah, I think it was added afterwards to the Etherpad.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I see. Thanks, Tushar.
Yeah, and that reminded me I should also share the Etherpad.
I'm okay, Rajat, with not sharing it if you want to see our faces. So maybe you don't want to. And now I put you in a tough spot.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, I mean, if people are okay with opening a separate.
His secret plan is revealed.
Tushar, can you turn off the mic? Like there is some noise, I think,
I turned it
coming
off.
from your end. Okay, thank you. So if everyone is okay opening there are firecrackers busting. Sorry about that. So if everyone is okay with like opening a separate Etherpad in a tab, like separate tab for the Etherpad, I can stop sharing and see everyone. I don't see anyone, so am I audible?
Yeah, we're just
Yep.
quiet.
I think people are just opening the Etherpad.
Okay, then I will stop sharing then.
I'm just working and listening at the same time.
Okay, let's keep this final day Etherpadless and see like if people have issues, I will share it at any time.
Sounds good.
Okay, so there was one topic which I wanted to discuss, and I'm not sure if Eric is around, but he has mentioned that several times during the past, like, do we even know read-only attachments work or not? So I was going through the code of this LIO target and TGT target, and I was exploring their like source code, and I found out there were options where we could export the LUN in a way that it is write protected. So basically, we added the support to provide the mode in the connection properties in micro version 3.54. So Nova can now, not now, but with micro version 3.54, Nova could provide the mode. Is it read only or read write? And based on that, we could do the attachments. I'm not 100% sure like how drivers do it, but in our targets, which we use with LVM, we don't have any. We don't use this parameter anywhere. So I propose some work in progress patches where with the Linux IO target, there was this library rtslib, which we use to execute some commands for the exporting and mapping. And using that, I was able to see a write protect flag in the Linux IO. Uh, and with the TGT also, like I think there was one option which I propose a separate patch for, but I'm thinking of only focusing mostly on the Linux IO, not because we have several targets and we can't do this for each and every one. So I will just uh, do testing POC on just this one target with Linux iSCSI LIO configuration and see. So this could maybe open up some issues on the initiator side if the read-only attachments don't work. I tested this once and the read-only part was not working, but I haven't had a chance to explore this more. Like I just tried out my code and did a instance attach and then tried to write it using DD and it was successful. So yeah, maybe there was some issue with my code or the bool path, but I will test this thoroughly again. But for the PTG, I just wanted to introduce this topic. Like I wanted to test this read-only attachments part. So yeah.
Rayat, I think I mentioned it to you earlier that we will have to be careful about multi-attach volumes because they can be problematic. Well, not problematic, is if you, basically, if you request a volume to be that is multi-attach to be read-only, you mount it on a host, and then you request a write access to it on the same host. It may be problematic, but this is precisely why I think the work you're doing on testing it's so good, because once we have one driver that we can all try it with, we can start, like you said, we can start figuring out all the locations where this may not be working.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning it, and I think Eric reviewed my patch and he also left a similar comment. So uh, initially, I will try to skip the multi-attach part. I understand, like, if a volume is multi-attach and two instances, one requesting read write and one requesting read only, then there is a problem there. And so initially, just to try separate out the complications, I will try to not do it with multi-attach volumes. But yeah, that could be a very good future scope, as you mentioned, like supporting this for multi-attach volumes as well.
Yeah, for now, you can just add it in the code, saying in a comment, in a to-do, figure out the multi-attach. And for now, just saying, if it's multi-attach, read-only doesn't work, or whatever. Because this is the LIO driver. Most people are not using it for production. So this is going to be useful mostly for us. Testings at the gate, to do ourselves testing. So I'm okay with it not including everything, not having everything figured out yet. But I think in the future we may want to figure it out to provide a reference driver or a reference driver target combo for new vendors. Because a new vendor trying to develop a new driver, or existing vendors may have a harder time figuring out all of the possible combinations. And if we figure it out in the LIO target, in the LVM driver, and we spell it out, these are the scenarios that there are, we do it this way, in this case, in that, in the other, then maybe it will be easier for them to follow it afterwards.
Yeah, I
Is
agree.
the issue with multi-attach? So if you're on the same host, the first guy attaches read-only, and then the second guy goes to attach the volume, it's going to be read-only whether they ask for it or not. Now, do we also have a situation?
Not necessarily.
No? Oh, okay, that's even worse.
They can specify, like Nova can specify with every attachment how they want it to be.
Okay,
Yeah, but the problem, so the trick here is how we are going to make sure that this happens. Are we going to do the same for all the volumes? For example, in the single attachment case, it is relatively easy if the backend can do it, can set a line to read only. But let's say a backend does not support it. But once again, we say this is OpenStack. Everything has to work independently of what the driver supports. So we may need to do something on the OS break side to make it read only. And if we have that, that could be what we use for the multi-attach with read only and write. Let's say we had a way to do a bin mount of the original volume, and in the bin mount saying this bin mount is read only. And that is how we manage both the backends that don't support read only on the LANs and the scenario of the multi-attach. That would be one possibility. So the attach is read write, but OS break says this is read write. and this should only be read-only. Let me be mounted into a different location with read-only access, and that is the one that I give a Nova. That is one possibility. And if we do that, that would work for multi-attach, because the first one, you return the first location, the location of the read-only, and on the second one, you could return the location of the read-write. So just think of it, you can think of it as a tree. You have the root, which is read-write, and when you request read-only, you create a beam mount that is basically pointing there and saying, but I'm read-only, because it is read-only. So we return this. Maybe I should draw something because I'm explaining it a bit poorly.
No, I've got the rough idea. I guess my question is just, if somebody, I mean, should we allow it to be read-only and read-write at the same time?
Yep.
Okay. So then, because my thought is, if I'm mounting it read-only, I don't want to destroy what's in there, right? So I'm being careful. But I guess somebody else could.
But there are a scenario, just imagine the standard case of one producer, multiple consumers. The producer writes, the consumers read. So you have a single writer and multiple readers.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe that's what you're looking for. So I don't expect this to be a common case, because usually the multi-attach is for everybody can write, and they have their own algorithm on top of it to actually coordinate it.
Right.
But reality is that we either forbid it, as in if you do multi-attach, they are all read-write. That is also a possibility. But we would have to explore it, and for that, I think we first need to have something we can actually test ourselves and to completely figure everything out. And we will probably need to ask vendors if they can all create lands that are read-only. If they cannot, then we will have to add an additional layer in OS break.
Okay.
And even then, oh my God, would it be when you connect to through libvirt, is there a way to set it to read only? Yet another thing we have to figure out. Because Nova can actually do, I believe, not only RBD, but also iSCSI connections, I think. So, anyway, things we will need to figure out.
Eric left a similar comment, like he wrote, like, I don't understand why we want to create the export as read-only here. Isn't the read-only status needs to be supported on the side attaching the volume, which I think he means Nova or Glance, whichever is doing it. So I wasn't sure, like the architecture we have built up, like Nova passes the mode parameter to Cinder. So Cinder is expected to do the read-only attachment, I guess. But Eric, as you mentioned, and also as Eric pointed out, like should we consider it doing on the initiator side?
That may be the case for some drivers that cannot do it. And in that case, you would still need to receive it in the connector proper, in the request, the read-only, because it should come from Nova to Cinder, and Cinder pass it to OS break to tell it, this is a read-only attachment, do it right, if we do it on the OS break side.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I'm not sure, like, okay, even OS break, but I think Eric was pointing something at Nova could, after the attachment is done and OS break has executed its code, after that Nova could. Is Eric around?
Oh,
I'm not sure.
I think I know what you mean. Create the XML. Yep, Eric.
I just got here though, so I'm not caught up on the context yet.
Yeah, I just shared a link. So you left a comment on my patch stating that should we do it on the sender side or the site requesting the attachment? So we were just discussing, were you talking about OSBreak or Nova in the context?
Well, I think if I remember that code I was looking at, it was actually trying to make a read-only export from the iSCSI target, which is not really a requirement for any of this. I mean, that's a nice thing, I guess, to do if you can do it and have it work right, but I don't think it wasn't obvious to me, that was the efficient way to do this because you really want it to be a read-only attachment and not a read-only volume from the target side. And I don't know what happens if you do it read-only on the target side and then you try to do multi-attach where, somebody's doing read-only and somebody's doing read-write. It seems like that gets complicated at that point.
Yeah, we were discussing the multi-attach case. Gorka also mentioned the same. So I think for now we will avoid the multi-attach thing with read-only attachments. But Gorka also suggested one different method where on the OSBreak side we could have different directory structures where one would point to read-only and other will uh, the read-write. Yeah, I'm not sure how exactly that would work, but depending on the attachments, can handle it on the OSBreak side, I think.
The solution that Eric is proposing, Eric, do you know if Libert can support any attribute on the volume that says this is read-only?
I thought that was how this stuff supposedly worked already. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Okay, then this is something that we need to look because I'm not sure that this is actually only supported.
I can ask the Nova team if they have any current mechanism for this. So even if like Nova does support it and it is being done, does it still make sense to test it on the target side as I was doing?
For single attach, I would do it. Because it's an extra layer of security that doesn't matter what happens, nobody's going to touch that volume. No matter if you have some weird code running in your system, in the host level, it will not. Nothing will happen.
Okay. Yeah, that's good then. I think with this way, I think Cinder will also have the authority to, like, as I mentioned, like Nova passes the mode to Cinder. So Cinder will at least have the authority to set this attachment type, attachment mode. Okay, I will then continue looking into it.
Well, so what does this mean for drivers that won't do read-only exports?
For those cases, and for multi-attach, we would need to explore the Nova side of it we were mentioning, right?
Yeah, that's what I understood. Like, I will discuss this with the Nova team, and if they do any current handling or is this supported with libvirt. So
That would be the nice solution. Allow drivers to export them for single attach, not multi-attach, as read-only. But in any case, if we can do it in the hypervisor, that could be best because that works for all the scenarios, regardless of the backend, regardless if it's multi-attach or single attach.
Do we still have those flags related to read-only on volume create operations?
I'm not sure, but I haven't seen that. I can check with the Cinder create command.
Yeah, I was just looking there. I don't see it on the command, but I might be thinking of something else.
We have this parameter read-only mode update, which I think updates the read-only value in the metadata, but I'm not sure why this is done and for which cases. Like if a volume is attached and we change this read-only flag, how does that behave? I'm not sure.
Well, and this is part of what I was wondering is, I think originally we had this concept that you would flag a volume as a read-only volume, and I'm not sure if that's even the right concept for most cases, or if we actually want read-only on the attachments and not the volume.
Okay, I just checked the Nova side of it. And if we return the access mode in the connection information data, they can set the volume to read only correctly.
That's good because I think that's the primary way that this has worked so far.
Yes.
I think there also at least used to be some gaps where that maybe didn't work on certain various protocols, because I don't think this is something that we have decent Tempest coverage on, and that's something we'll need to explore in this area.
Yeah, definitely we have to explore if things like the RBD driver or whatever also support this as intended.
Yeah, I have a strong hunch from years ago that I think at one point when you tried to do it with RBD, it just ignored it. And I don't know. I don't know if that's the case at all now, but I think there were some issues like that at one point at least.
I'm checking the RBD one right now, just in case. Yeah. Probably works now, at least at the XML level. I mean, I think the XML will have the right read-only thingy, but I don't know if actually will be honored by the hypervisor.
Yeah, I think I can explore on this more. I didn't get much time to go very in depth to it, but I got very useful feedback to even check uh, from the Nova side and other possibilities. So I will start with the Cinder side work, and in parallel also check how does the Nova side work for all drivers, uh, just confirm from their side. Okay, that's all from my side. I think I'm good on this one. And we have a cross project with Lance in 15 minutes, and I would quickly like to discuss one more topic which doesn't require much discussion, but I just wanted some I just wanted to know if it still made any sense, like is it is regarding the user messages. So this was something I was working on, I think 2-3 cycles ago, and recently I didn't get much time to look into it. But I was thinking of planning to continue that work because a lot of parts of it are already done, and it would be very useful. I got some feedback internally as well, like they would love to get more user messages. On the volume side, even I think I've added messages on the migration and retype side as well. So just wanted to continue this and wanted to know if it still made sense to pursue it.
I think it definitely does, but this might be a good intern project. I mean, assuming we got somebody.
Yeah, I think I developed the base framework for this, and I think the message adding is very easier now.
Yeah, you added that stuff where we can pass things along in the context, right? Which is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think someone suggested it because there were a lot of user messages. Maybe it was Gurka. But yeah, we have that in place now.
I forgot, did we document it in the contributor guides?
To add new user messages?
Yeah.
I mean, using the context thing?
Yeah, all of it.
I don't think
user messages plus that.
Yeah, I don't remember doing it.
We do have a user messages guide for developers, so we can add something to that.
Then it's easier to just add this small information than to write it all.
Yeah, that would be good and good action point.
Yeah, and I guess we still have that situation with the we discussed this at a PTG maybe 2 times ago. Because you can pass the exception. There's this really counterintuitive way that it works, where there's an exception mapping, there's the ability to pass an exception, and there's ability to pass a string. And if you pass a string and an exception, and the exception's in the mapping, then you get the map string and not the string you actually pass. So it makes it harder at the point of when you create the user message, you got to think, do I know more than the map? The idea of the mapping was to make it, hey, just toss in an exception, you'll get a nice message out. But what winds up happening is that if you do that, you override, you get a more specific generic message, but maybe not what you want, because you know exactly what happened right where you're creating the message. So right now it's something to be aware of when you review this stuff, that if you got to look, but we may want to, I forget hope it wasn't an action item for me to go fix this, but I think we hadn't quite decided I'll put it this way. I think we hadn't quite decided how we want to handle that. So that's another thing just to be aware of. So I think that's stated pretty clearly in the developer guide for using the user messages, but it's something reviewers have to remember because it's counterintuitive how it works.
So maybe we have to change it like you
Yeah,
said.
so it
If
might,
it's counterintuitive, if it's not easy to read or to understand, maybe we just need to change it.
and then the other thing is, I'm trying to remember where I saw this, but there seems to be a case where so the idea of the user messages is we have these generic messages that won't leak information, but will give end users some kind of idea of what's happening so that they're not, my volume went to error, why, right? So at least you go to the user message and it's out of space on the back end or something, right? But I think I came across a case where it would be nice to leave some more specific information. But now I can't remember what it is. So I guess that's kind of a useless point. But I'll have to try to remember, and they'll just bring it up at a weekly meeting. Because we don't want to leak information, but on the other hand, some of those things are so general as to be like, it's better than nothing, but it's not as good as actually.
Did we store the request ID in there, in the user messages, or not?
Yes, because you can search by it.
Because then that in itself is really useful. Even if the message is generic, when you complain to a system admin, you already gave them the request,
Right,
can give them, or they can get it. Because otherwise, you always find, oh, I launched the command, it failed, but I don't have the request ID because I didn't say -- debug. And it's already too late.
Okay. All right, so that's okay. So maybe we need to, so I know we've got good user message documentation for the developer side, because I wrote it. But we should probably say something on the operator side about using them. Because I don't know that everybody knows that they exist. And it would be useful to mention something like this about, you've got the request ID, so now you can go to the logs and get details.
But that's precisely one of the reasons why Rajat was working on it, so that we have enough coverage that it's relevant. Because before we had like 2 places or 3, not enough to actually tell people this is something you should be looking at.
Yeah, okay, so we should see, but I think we got backups covered now. A good bit of volume stuff, I think. So maybe we're ready to let this loose on the world. And then this is sort of unrelated. So at the TC meeting yesterday, the OpenStack client situation came up, of course. And the thing I heard that was kind of annoying was that our documentation sucks because they can't figure out how anything works from the API reference, which was, I thought our API reference is not bad. So they sometimes either go to the Python Cinder client to see what is being passed, or they go to.
But that's what they have to do. They have to go to a Cinder client so they don't rename things with weird names.
Well, but see,
so I don't care
that's the
API.
thing, right? So they want to take their names and figure out how to make. Yeah, I know it's. Yeah, and I don't know. It's hard to express because I'm worried about Rajat taking on too much stuff. So I'm just watching your list get bigger and bigger, right? But like with the Cinder client thing, it's going to be hard to do the the coverage assessment to make sure everything's covered because they renamed everything and they hid a lot of shit. And so it's like, Stephen gave us this nice list of here's a command and there's a command, but it has no granularity. And so it's like we don't actually know that any of this stuff works. And renaming everything was not very helpful in that regard. But anyway, all right, I'll just shut up because we're getting off track here.
Maybe we can start using the OpenStack client more ourselves so that we can find those gaps. It is going to be painful because I hate the OpenStack client, but that's going to be the future anyway. So if we start using it, finding the gaps, then we can at least let them know.
And they're also, I'm trying to remember. There's some kind. Let me get. I'll have to get this information. There's some kind of switch that will prevent it from doing an entry point scan, which speeds up the loading of the client. And I'm not sure whether it does it once and caches it, maybe, so the first time is really slow. But let me find out about that, because that came up because somebody was mentioning how slow it is on the, just in Zool when you're running the Tempest jobs.
It is slow, and if you try to create an empty volume in Cinder and there is no glance endpoint, it doesn't work. You cannot create an empty volume if you don't have glance endpoints, which is crazy.
So, yes, so there's the question of how we're going to deal with the standalone Cinder, and the impression I got is
no, maybe it's just what you said. If we can disable the caching of the endpoints, then maybe this error won't happen.
Yeah, so maybe what we need is another flag to right. So I think they've got a flag that. Let me find out. Yeah, let me get more information about that. But the other thing I wanted to mention, I'm sorry, this is off topic too. Apparently, there have been really good improvements on Python 3.10 with respect to speed, and they're seeing, like, I don't know, I think 10 minutes is fairly dramatic reduction in Zool job time for Tempest runs. So
just so you know, I don't know about the times, but if they can make, I think, I don't know in 10, but in 11 they said that it was a lot better, the efficiency. So
yeah, so it's
maybe
every
it
little
is.
bit helps. All right. Yeah, so I'll have to reach out to Artem and just say, when you find places where the documentation is unclear, it would be nice if you file a bug instead of, whatever. Or they could,
Instead of swearing.
yeah, they could patch the docs with what they've discovered, which would be even better. Yeah, I think from what I understood, it's not you disable the caching of endpoints at start. I think you can cache, because otherwise, every time you go to run the thing, it scans all the entry points. So,
With what? They scan all the entry points? Are they drunk? Why all the entry points?
well, because I've got to discover all the plugins or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's probably why they also load every single piece of library that they have around, even if you only want one.
Right. Yeah, you don't really get a choice.
This is literally garbage, because I tried running open. Yeah, if you do a script, a bash script, not a Python script, a bash script, and you use the OpenStack client, it's going to be slow, really slow, because each call takes like 3 or 4 times as long as just the Cinder client, every single call. So that is something that eventually we will have to figure out how to improve.
Well, I think this might be because they were seeing this on Infra too, and somebody mentioned they had just put in this caching flag. So I think you can at least get it so that the first startup will be really slow, but then it won't have to scan the entry points anymore. And I guess
That
the
would
reason,
definitely be an improvement.
yeah, and I think the reason why that's off by default is they don't know if you're going to add more stuff. I don't know. I guess they always want to get the freshest list of what's available.
I asked Abhishek and Pranali, and the Glance team would be joining us any minute, in 1 minute.
Okay.
Hi, Abhishek.
Hey, good morning,
So this,
everyone.
I was going to say, just with the OpenStack client. So in this case, we're going to be eating our own dog food, and it's going to be really dog food. Hey, Abhishek.
Hey, hi. Uh, I think we are waiting for other people's right of plans.
Yeah.
Okay, just let me ping them.
So for the Glance team joining, I have shared the Etherpad in the chat. I'm not sure if Glance team has their own Etherpad, so I'm okay to take notes anywhere.
Yeah, we have the separate one, but we are also okay wherever we want to take.
So Rajat, when you say you're putting stuff in the chat, you mean the chat in Blue Jeans?
Yeah.
So that still doesn't work for me. Okay. So I don't get anything, and I've been sending messages to the chat, and they just sort of disappear, and they don't even show up on my end. So I'm sure nobody has seen them. So okay.
Nope, we haven't.
Yeah.
You have special version of Blue Jeans.
I do. I've got the auto delete chat version. It's like what I do with Memo List. Everything just goes to delete.
It's just censoring you.
So do we have the whole Glance team or the interested members here?
I think we have interested member here.
And Abhishek, will someone from Keystone team will be joining us?
Not sure.
Yeah.
They might be busy in TC meetings.
So I guess the keystone reason would be about the service
Right,
role.
right.
Yeah.
So we talked about that yesterday at the TC.
Mm-hmm.
They're planning to do it in Antelope, or to be more exact, people have said that it should be done in Antelope so that we can continue with the secure RBAC community goal. But nobody was there from Keystone to say, yeah, we're actually working on this. So that may
Right.
be the holdup. And the same thing with the manager role.
Right. I put up
Because
initial patch and then there is no progress on that at all.
yeah, so
I really doubt.
that was inconclusive. Let me I'll ask today
Mhm.
if we can get like a update about how reasonable it is to expect these things to happen.
So I maybe volunteer myself by putting some extra time if someone is ready to assist me for implementing service role. I can put some extra time. So
that one, and that one shouldn't be too bad because it's out of the problem with the manager role is it might be in use already at
Pre-exist,
sites,
right.
and you got to introduce it into the hierarchy. But the service role can be completely outside the
Right.
hierarchy, right? That's the whole point. So yeah, that should actually be a good one.
Yeah. So once spec is reviewed and approach is finalized, then if no one there is to work on it, then I can volunteer myself for that.
Okay.
So does anyone know who is driving this effort from the Keystone side? Like any contact person who we can ask these things
Nope.
after dance?
Probably Doug. I don't know how to say his last. Doug Mendizabal, I think. I'm not sure.
Harry Rybecki, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. So between those two, so
Right.
yeah, I think so. Just ping them directly, Abhishek, and let them know. Because the service role seems to be, I think the hardest part of that is going to be, I think we should call it like OpenStack service or something, so that we don't have to worry about clashes with existing deployments that have a service role that exists.
Right. That is why I'm waiting for the spec to be finalized.
And then there is the funny question, what is going to be the scope of that service role?
Well, it's going to be project scope because there's no other. Well, this is the one thing, right? Well, they should actually make system scope.
Yep.
Yeah, but that's good because if we tell operators not to use system, sort of gives us an extra layer of protection, I think. No, actually it doesn't, because the latest thing is that everything's going to be project scoped, and that's got to be declared in the rules also. So if we've got a system, so if it's a service role, so the question is, are we going to write new APIs for the services to contact? And if we do, then we can do whatever we want. But if the services are contacting the same APIs that normal people would use, just with the service role in addition to the other stuff, then we can't do the scope thing. All right, so this is going to be more complicated, of course.
Do we have any idea about the system scope? I think with the last operator meetup in Berlin, I think they decided it was very confusing for the operators to use, so they restricted to project. And even in the RBAC goals, I just see the service role and the manager role. I'm not sure there was any particular thing said about the system scope being implemented.
Yeah, my memory is that it didn't come up with respect to those. It was just that there'd be this role.
Is this about scope or role?
The system scope.
Well, it's just when you go to use, I guess it's the expected way that this thing should function. So we'll have a service role, and then the question is, all right, so then what do you do with it?
So, Brian, my question was regarding the system scope. Like, are we going to implement it in the near future? Because I didn't see that being discussed.
Well, the system scope already exists, but the advice is that for consistent action, every rule should be project scoped. So we should be, right, so it's one of the things in the action items for secure RBAC is that we've got to go back and then set a scope type on every rule, and it should be project. And I was holding out against that because that is not overridable by an operator. So the scope type, you can override the rule, but you can't override the scope type. So once we do that, we make it impossible for anyone to use system scope for writing any of their rules. And that's been considered okay because nobody understands how it's supposed to work anyway. And then this way, if you show up with a system, if you get a system scope token and show up and try to use an API, you'll get rejected right away. Because otherwise, there are places where, since the system scoped token doesn't have any project ID information associated with it, at any point in where you need a project ID in the context to do something, it will fail. And that will probably be after the, at some weird point in the API call. So the idea is it just gets rejected immediately.
Yeah, so the system scope won't work until we implement that in the services like Nova and Cinder Neutron. And was there any discussion regarding implementing it? Because I don't see anything around that as of now.
No, so the idea is basically to unimplement it, except possibly for ironic. Because
So we can, yeah, sorry, I was just saying, so we can assume these manager and service role to be project scope for the near future.
Everything's going to be project scoped, yeah. And the manager should be, because the manager should be relative to a specific project. Unless it changed since the last time I read this, but. So I'm sorry, so we're completely off track from what we wanted to talk about. So we want to use the service role, however, in some appropriate way to make good things happen, is basically what's happening here.
Okay, so Rajat, do you want to introduce your approach once again, what you are suggesting, and how it will help us to remove that security threat which we are talking about?
Yeah, sure. So basically, we have this config option on the glance side, show multiple locations, which is causing this security vulnerability where we want to enable it to allow services to do some optimization, like Nova and Cinder does some optimizations based on that config option. But at the same time, if that is set to true, then users could also maliciously update image locations, and that's what we wanted to prevent. So in last cycle, I proposed a spec to glance to remove that config option and replace it with a new locations API that was approved at that time. So that approach consisted of a new location add API and a location get. As far as I looked into the Cinder and Nova code, they were only calling location add for their purposes, like they would do their optimization. Like for Cinder, we would just clone the volume we have and just register the location on the glance side, and that was it for us. So that eliminated the need of using that show multiple locations option, and at the same time, this interaction, like adding the location in the new API, required the service role. So the new location add API would have a policy of role service. So only services could access those API and the normal users couldn't. So that would prevent the scenario we have. That was basically my approach.
Off the top of my head, that seems worth doing still.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much code to do. Like all the code already exists on the image update call that we use for location operations like location add, delete on the glance side. So we just have to use that code in the new location API and set this policy authorization to service in the new API, and that can be an internal API the users cannot access.
I think the other thing, I guess we can talk about this on the spec. I think we will have information like the size, so we could pass that in this location add to make sure to populate some of the things so we don't have to leave like the 0 size image records around. I don't know if we would have hash information. I guess we'd have virtual size maybe. So there are some things that we could set. And if it's a trusted service doing it, I think that would be good. And then Nova could use this also because they should have some information that they could set on the image record also. Like they should know the size, I think.
So as far as I remember, like we passed the location URL and also some metadata, and I think that could be utilized to set the parameters as Brian mentioned on the image. Yeah. So how does that approach like sound to the glance team? Any issues? Like we discussed this last cycle, and I think there was an agreeable decision. But does that also solve the security issue we are currently having, or does it leave out any edge cases for that?
So far, I think we discussed this in the last cycle, and we agree to have this new API. We approved that spec also for implementation, but we are still waiting on our service role. To be frank, no one knows like when that implementation can be done. But till then, I think there are other approaches on the table for discussion as well. So one another approach is to solve this at deployment side by having 2 glance APIs deployed. One is internal,
But
and
that doesn't fix the security issue either. It just
workaround.
mitigates it.
Right.
It limits the exposure of it, but it doesn't. So the
Please explain
I think
exactly what's left out. I don't know. Could you explain why it doesn't close it, please?
so. There is still API existing. So the same as long as you expose the locations API somewhere in the services where there is possibility that someone gets access to that API endpoint, and we do not have any validification of the data what those locations consist, and we allow adding more than one location through that API. There is always possibility that someone still goes and pushes a different data into that image.
Okay, but that seems
so that's the problem what it has, and that's why I'm like, if we are going towards new API, and this was discussed during the week earlier already, the big thing is we have to design that API in a sensible way. So let's not try to re-implement the whole current locations API just with the new endpoint, because that's not going to help anyone. But if we do this in a way that the location add will only add a location into a queued image, so that you only add that one location through that API, the image goes active, that will solve already a heap load of problems. Now, the end user still don't have any hash they could validate that image. Is that image changing or not? Is the image what they expect it to be? But at least it's loads to the better direction than where we are now.
But maybe I'm missing something, but the only people able to add or to see is owner or admin, no?
Yes, correct.
So basically you're saying that if I want to shoot myself in the foot because I love my credentials, they can do it.
No.
Is that
It's not shooting yourself on the foot, because you might be publishing community images. You might be publishing Fedora images as a community image in the cloud, and you might have 1,000 instances by 500 different projects spun out of that image. Then you go and swap the image data to something that has a malicious content in it, and those 500 projects keep spinning VMs out of that same image because they assume that it's valid, and now you have a backdoor into each one of those instances. That's the problem.
But I could do it the first time as well, right? I don't need to modify an existing image. I can create a public image that already contains the malicious code.
Right, but the idea is you could do a bait and switch kind of thing, where somebody gets the image.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Continue.
But it's
so that's the whole point. Like because we have the promise from a glance side that once image goes active, it's immutable. So if you validate that image once, you download that image from the cloud, you go like, okay, you run it through your security checks, like, hey, this is valid, there is no problems in this image, and then you put that image ID to your automation, like, okay, we will use this image forever from now. And then the image owner goes and changes the content of that image. Now we have a problem because you trust that the image is immutable, and it's actually not.
Okay, so yeah, I see. It's about the immutability of the images.
Correct. So obviously, if you are using a third-party image that you don't necessarily trust the vendor, you don't know the vendor, you could go and validate that image and check that there is nothing malicious in it, and then start using it. And when you are using that same image ID, you would expect that image what you validated is the same image what you are using. But because of the problems in the locations API, and because of us not verifying those hashes, that's actually not the case, which is the major problem here. Then obviously the next layer of those same problems is it might be just a malicious user, disgruntled employee of that project, and your project thinks even their private image is safe. And next step is that your image content has changed and there is no verification for that, and no one knows about it.
So coming back to
in the proposed solution, you said, Erno, that basically, if I understood, now that I understand what the problem is, now I'm trying to go back to the solution you proposed, which is basically you can add the first location without that is what you were saying, right? that in itself would solve many of the problems that we have at the first location. Yeah. Right?
Yes, because if you cannot add additional locations through the location API, that means that you cannot swap the data afterwards.
In Ragad, that would resolve the main case that we are looking for, right? Which is the optimized one.
Yes, and that's also right? the reason why I was saying that would solve a heap lot of issues, is because as far as I know, Nova nor Cinder has no reason ever to push multiple locations into a single image. It will always you are creating a snapshot or image out of volume. You have that one location that you just don't want to upload. And after that, if it needs to go to other stores, the user can always go and call image copy and have a glance asynchronously copy that image to different stores. And when Glance is doing that on the backend, there is no one changing the image data in between.
So then, are you proposing to just eliminate multiple locations and just have a single location per image?
No, just being able to, when you try to add a location, there must not be any location in there. If there is already a location, you cannot add more through that API, if I understand correctly, because that's the problem. If you add more and there is no check, you could be adding whatever you want. But if there is nothing,
exactly the
and
problem.
you add the first, then you're fine. It is still never going to change, which is the immutability that Erno keeps referring to, because that's a contract in Glance.
Exactly.
Image, when it has data, never changes.
So
So
then,
if we
why
go
would
with,
you have multiple locations at all?
because Glance internally copies images into different stores and publishes those, but that's, I think, Glance does internally and not accessible to users.
Right. So he's saying that the new location API should be able to add location only to queued images, and once
Correct.
it is active, then this new
That
location
endpoint
API
will just
just
tell
give,
the user like not authorized, not allowed to do this.
forbidden, right?
Yeah, forbidden basically.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, this wouldn't even require the service role. Just check if
Correct.
the image is
Correct.
Correct.
That's what I was saying when you were originally proposing the admin, using admin, that we shouldn't do that. And if we limit the scope of that API to only the parts what are needed, we can still use the user credentials, which means that we can get all of our auditing workflows still working exactly like they did, and we don't need to guess who in Earth created this image or added data into it.
I like the simplicity of the solution.
Right. Me too.
So then we remove the right ability to change locations through the patch, right?
That would be the next step once Nova and Cinder would be using that.
the new
There would
API,
be never ever again reason to enable multiple locations in a config. So we could finally get to the point where we can remove that option and that whole mess altogether.
Okay.
so. I think if the Glance changes get in, then on the Cinder and Nova side, we just have to update the API we are calling, and that should get in the same cycle as it is. So we get, like, we don't publish half work to in a cycle release.
So that works for the create location API. Now, the next part of the problem is that for Cinder and Nova to be able to consume the image directly from the backend, they need a way to get those locations. So the get location API part would need that service role, because we don't want to expose that to the end user, because the image might be in multiple stores. It might be on 3 different Cinder pools.
Yeah, basically what you said. We don't want to expose it outside.
Exactly, and that's what Brian highlighted also on the OSSN 90, which is like that's the second part of the problem, that we are leaking backend information. But Nova and Cinder still needs that information to be able to consume those images directly. So the get part of that API would need to be still.
It would still need to exist, but
endpoint.
you can, yeah, different service endpoint, yeah.
Okay, but it sounds like we could do the add separately. And it would make sense to do that
Yeah.
because it would address the problem. So I
Because
guess maybe,
one of them is a deployment thing, and the other is not a deployment. One is how to deploy, the other how the code in Cinder and Nova works. So completely separated things to fix a common issue.
Yeah, in the spec as well, I have divided the work items into different phases, so we can alter that. But yeah, I like the approach as well. It is easy to implement, as I can see.
And that would address every other part of the concerns that has been about this whole direct usage mess, apart from the fact that the user would still not have a checksum or hash of that image, so they could not validate it manually. They would just need to trust the system to work as designed. But that's the only part that is left after if we design this new API well. That's kind of what I have been pushing.
Maybe
we talked
could...
about that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Gorko.
No, please go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to say, we talked about that, and our feeling is that as long as there's a way, so if it's important to you to validate, you could set things up so that you only use stores that don't access stuff directly from the back end. So it's up to the operator to decide whether to do it or not. I don't think we need to worry about introducing a checksum to bulletproof this.
I think basically it is a trade-off. Like Brian is saying, if a trade-off that should be decided by the system administrator that makes the deployment. It should be up to them whether they want to have things optimized or to have the extra checks by having hashes and everything. And if they want that, then they just have to disable this other deployment option.
Yeah, well, we don't need to even disable the API. So one of the beautiful things about if we implement this new location add API as a user doable is that also maintains our HTTP store, still a usable store. And now one of the things what I like, what I think it was Brian or Rashad mentioned at some point, that we could actually have also different input content and metadata in that call when we are creating that location. So one option is that we could still have a location API which allows you to add a location, and we could just give it a flag. For example, if you are using HTTP store and you are consuming Fedora or Ubuntu directly from DCN instead of storing it locally, you could still give it a flag like, hey, go ahead and read this image once so that we get the checksum in file. And when that is consumed by the service that is using it, they would have a checksum in record that they can validate.
So Arno, I had this confusion like how the HTTP stores relies on the current location implementation.
Because there is no other way to create an image with HTTP store than create an empty image and then go and add that URI as a location to that image. We do not have any other entry point at the moment to consume HTTP store remotely.
Okay, and we could modify that to the new location API, given that you mentioned like there is some metadata which we wanted to provide to it.
Exactly. So we could have a user creating an image directly from some external DCN and just have a flag in the location add call, like, hey, go ahead and check some this for me. and Glance would just kick off asynchronous checksum job that goes and reads the data once from the CDN and calculates hash of it, so that if the content in the CDN suddenly changes, it would fail that image to boot because it's not the same image what was expected. And Python Glance client gives this automatically, so whenever you are consuming the image, you are just asking it from Glance. So when you are not utilizing like Ceph or Cinder direct backend call, the client will do this checksum verification as long as the checksum exists in the image metadata transparently for you. It will just fail the download part if the checksum does not match.
Okay, so it sounds like we're basically on track with this with locations API that Rajat proposed. So this seems good.
Yeah, I can update the spec with the details. I've already mentioned everything, the Cinder Etherpad. If anyone would like to modify it, like if there are some mistakes with my understanding, but I can modify the spec based on that. I'm not sure if anyone would be willing to work on it from the client side.
I will work on it as I promised last cycle. I already promised you that I will work on it, so I will work on it.
I can spend some time helping out on that as well. That's not a problem because, and thanks a lot for taking the concerns into account. Like my biggest red flag on that proposal originally was like it's basically just copying the behavior of the already faulty API to just a new endpoint and relying on using admin account. But now if we are on agreement that we can actually design it to work, be a useful API that can be utilized for all the location needs, that's a great thing in my point of view, because that means that we can finally get rid of the very faulty and very vulnerable way of handling locations through the patch call.
I think that the multiple locations was really an attempt to have multiple Glance stores without actually implementing that. So now that we actually do have multiple Glance stores, Glance can actually handle this. And
I think the original, if I recall correctly, the original idea behind that was that, say your as a operator are changing your Glance. So this was definitely, yes, before multi-store existed. You were still able to configure multiple different store types. And the idea was that, say you have an operator who has been using file store over NFS, and they wanted to change it to Swift, for example, so that they could go and have their own tooling to copy the data from NFS to Swift, and then tell Glance like, hey, you can now find the data from here and go and delete it from the NFS. So basically just getting rid of the old storage backend bit by bit, doing that. It was never supposed to be a API that is on kind of daily consumption.
Do you have a or I guess I should say, do we have a migration path now from store to store if somebody wants to do that?
Yeah, you just use the
copy all those images.
Copy image import call, and then we have also delete from store. So you just issue a delete to a specific store ID, and it cleans it out from the old one.
All right, so you can just script it up to copy all your. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right, so the use case is covered. So this
yeah,
sounds good.
this would literally solve a big hole that we have been fighting for 5 years now.
All right, cool. Sounds good.
So I
But yeah, the
guess
big part for getting Nova and Cinder to utilize this is to get that service account or service role still done in a keystone so that you can implement the list locations call for Nova and Cinder so that you have the URIs where you can consume that image from, and then modify the code on both to be able to utilize those new APIs, and then we can get rid of multiple locations or show multiple locations.
Right.
And I don't see any excuse for user needing to see the location URIs. Like if admin needs to look into that, they can also always just issue themselves a service token and do the list call with that.
So as far as I remember, like the get location part is done with the Cinder and RBD store. Like Glance and Cinder both are using RBD store, or when Glance is using Cinder store, then we consume these locations.
Yes, but the problem is that currently it's listed on the image metadata when the show multiple locations is enabled, or the show direct image URL. But when we close that hole, that it's not visible on the image metadata anymore. Both Cinder and Nova need some way to get that direct URI for the image. So that's why the list call is important.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the occurrences we have in Cinder code utilizing the new API
Yeah,
discussed.
so I bet the Cinder code is just picking the information out of the response of the get image call that shows the location list in the metadata there. I don't think there is any other way to get it at the moment.
Yeah, I think there's a parameter direct URL or direct URI which we use.
Okay, so that means that there is actually also, in a sense, a problem and a bug, because if you rely only on that and the image is in multiple stores, that might not point to the store what you actually want. So say if the image is in Swift store and in Cinder store, you might get with the direct location only the URI of the Swift store. You might not get the Cinder store, so you actually need to look at the whole locations list and see which one you can consume directly.
Yeah, we sort through the locations list.
Okay, cool.
So yeah.
So it's not just relying on that single direct URI field. Okay, cool. That's fine then.
I think we are good then.
Yeah, I think that was a good discussion, and we have finally some nice plan to implement this new locations APIs.
Okay. Yeah, so we need to make sure that someone should follow up with Keystone for service role implementation.
I'll volunteer to do that. So I'll push to see if I can get a timeline or a commitment for them to do it by M1 or something.
And if you find that they lack contributors, then
I will tell them
yeah,
about you first thing.
yeah. So
All right, cool.
Just
just
volume
if
called
you
Abhishek for
yeah,
everything. He's not PTL anymore. He has all the time in the world.
sounds good.
Yeah, so does the Glance team have any other topics, like any topics in mind that they wanted to discuss?
I had one topic, but we can take it later also. Refactoring of Cinder driver of Glance. That is in my mind for very long, but it requires thorough understanding of current implementation of Cinder driver and how we can refactor it.
So I was already
Yeah.
working on refactoring it, but my goal was basically to support this extend in use volume, which we support on the Cinder side. But to implement that, so not all the drivers support it. So I was doing some refactoring to break Cinder into different driver specific files.
Cinder
And
driver from Glance, right?
yeah,
Yes.
so does that align with your goal?
Yeah. That is what I want to come up with. We should have subdrivers, subsections of drivers for Cinder, because there is a lot of if-else conditioning and it looks like a patchy code altogether. And it's difficult to understand if we keep adding conditions based on Cinder Cinder backends. So that is the base idea
Yes.
of my discussion here.
So I have already proposed a code where I have separated out the NFS code, like that was the big chunks there, which was causing the like readability issue. So you can maybe take a look at my patch, and I was planning to like do more work on it. But yeah,
Okay.
as you mentioned, like it is quite hard to read the Cinder store as of now. So I was working on the same thing to break it down into different drivers.
Okay. Let's sync offline and to discuss this more. I think we too can get this done.
I think that might be a good topic for mid-cycle or next PTG, maybe once you get well started with that effort, to see there is lots of like corner cases where we go like, oh, this is supported, this is not supported, that we are not enforcing. Basically, things will just break if things are configured wrongly. So when we get those two separate driver bases and get to list all those, like I think there was a problem with, like you said, NFS and was it encrypted volumes that
Yeah.
you might land up getting and not being able to use. So once you get the refactoring ongoing, let's see if we can clarify some of those and enforce them a little bit more easily, so that we get to clean up lots of the conditioning there as well.
Yeah, sure. I have a patch mentioned in the chat, and for Brian, I have mentioned it in the Etherpad.
Yeah, this is more of the kind of the service account or service role basis as well, because I think that opens the possibility for us to basically get a little bit more information in the future from Cinder than what Cinder is willing to give for the end user for different things. So it would be nice to look into that as well, like if we can open up some endpoints in the Cinder API to pull out information that would be important when we are doing automated creations like the images into volumes.
Yeah, so currently the Cinder driver relies on the configured credentials like the username, password, and usually we recommend it to be the service project to be used for this. But if that is not configured, we take the context of the user, and that image volume is stored in that. So I found it like we recommend to use the service project, but if they don't, then they will see an image volume and they don't know what to do with that because it is containing the image, but the user should not do any action on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will have a look at the patch.
Yeah, thanks, Abhishek.
I think we can go back to glass channel then, and you can continue your further discussions related Cinder. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining and having a useful discussion.
Thanks. This was good. Take care.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you.
Bye.
Bye. So I was contacted by Melanie and Sylvian yesterday, and I regarding a NFS patch they were working on. So yeah, explaining the context is slight complicated. I think they wanted us to review it, but again in the morning, Melanie said that she would be happy to have a quick session about it. So maybe I can ping her or any interested Nova folks if they want to discuss it quickly. I don't think it's a very big change or big patch, but just wanted to get our perspective on it.
This is the format tracking fixes.
Yeah, so they yeah, I mean, I need to refresh my memory, but yeah, it's related to that. Yeah, I will need to think about it.
Okay.
And apart from this discussion, we have like the Festival of Access Reviews and a patch proposed by Vault. And it seemed slight complicated at first, and we pushed it to the next cycle. But it would be great if Vault could provide an overview of that, and we could then easily review it and get that change in. I will just wait 1-2 minutes for Melanie to respond, and if she doesn't, we can proceed with reviewing Vault's patch. Yeah, thanks, Brian, for joining. It was, yeah, I mean, a lot of things we discussed were very useful, and you were double booked. Still, you joined, so thanks a lot for that.
Okay, see you later.
Yeah, so no reply as of now. So I think we can proceed with Volt's patch. What can you provide a quick overview of what we are trying to achieve with that?
Which patch is it? I'm sorry.
I will just mention that in the chat.
Is it 542? Line 542 in the Etherpad?
Yeah,
Is it? Yes. This one I was just working on this morning. Okay, so throughout the volume manager, there are places where it attempts to keep track of the allocated capacity. And this is a tracker on every single pool, on every backend, every pool in that the volume manager maintains and manages. And that allocated capacity is directly used by the scheduler in decision-making processes for provisioning. And those stats without this patch are completely broken and not really tracked very well. Such as the biggest one, which is volume migrations. It does not update those stats correctly at all. So when you move say for example, a large volume of a large amount of volumes from one pool to another, all of a sudden the stats are really out of whack, and the scheduler does not get an accurate picture of how much it has allocated on that particular back end. And then bad decisions are made from there.
But Walter, one question: isn't the scheduler changing it automatically when it does when it says, okay, the migration can be done? It's not doing anything.
It does in its local copy, but when the volume manager does its next stats updates, all that gets pushed up and all that stuff is lost.
Okay, I see. It's a race condition between I have updated it and the volume service hasn't done it yet. I push new ones, so whatever you did is lost.
Yeah, as you may or may not know, there are multiple places where the live stats are actually kept track of, and one place is the scheduler, and the other place is all of the volume managers, volume services, if you will, that are running. And those have to be in sync, and typically the volume manager pushes into the scheduler and overwrites everything because it's always understood that the driver plus the volume manager is the source of truth. But in this case, since the volume manager is not correctly tracking and keeping track of when volumes get moved from one backend to another, or when extends happens, or there's a couple of the fixes in this patch as well that this covers. So those stats get out of whack. And I noticed this particularly becomes more evident as you get closer to fully utilizing your pools. We do a lot of migrations, and when those pools are pretty full, we could actually get a race condition without this, that someone asks to migrate like 10 volumes and they all land on the same pool because the stats are out of date, and then we're overcommitted. And so that's really the use case that this covers, is that when you're getting close to full utilization, we prevent the overcommitting. And this is for thin and for thick. It breaks both of those. So, and particularly for thick provisioning, that's really bad.
If I understand correctly, if I remember correctly, the code in Cinder, this also interacts with the fact that we don't always ask, the manager doesn't always ask the driver for an update. It caches the data for a while and sends out what it has in the memory. So the problem is that between cache refresh, you're sending incorrect data because this patch is not there to update those things.
Yes.
Now I fully understand. It's a mix of everything. Overwriting what the scheduler has, plus we are in between cache refreshes, so we don't have that information here. Okay, I see now. Thanks.
Correct. And as well as the drivers themselves don't keep track of how many volumes and how much space all of those volumes has consumed. The only thing that's reliable being reported by the drivers is the free space reported by the backend. That's really the only thing that's reliable. And so the volume manager, it's his job to keep track of all of the allocated capacity for each of the individual pools. And the only time in which, without this patch, that data is accurate is at startup time. After you've done any operations after that, it's not correct, because at a init host time, yes, it goes through every single volume and snapshot that backend reports, and that's when it initializes all of those. What's that?
The volume manager does that. As long as the driver does not report it, the manager does it itself.
That's what I'm saying. The only time in which those values without this patch are accurate is at startup time, init host time.
No, what I'm saying is that, if I remember correctly, we are doing it every time. We are checking the database and doing the addition.
We're supposed to be, but we're not. That's what this patch fixes.
I'm pretty sure we do. I don't know if it's in the right place, but we are.
It's missing several.
Doing the addition.
It's missing in several places. That's the whole purpose of this patch. In migrate volume, we don't do it. It's not there.
No, you're not. I'm not explaining myself. I'm not saying that we are not keeping the addition. I'm saying that we are literally adding the volumes in the database, listing, adding, and returning it. Not only on a start, unless somebody removed the code that did that.
I don't understand what you're saying. What I'm saying is the live.
You're talking about deltas. You're talking about deltas. I'm telling you that in a place, I don't remember where, and not only on a start, we do the addition based on the database contents.
That's what I was explaining before. That's literally what I was explaining.
You were saying that only on a start, and I say not only on a start.
No. What I said, the only time in which that data is accurate is after init host time, because that's when
and I'm saying that correctly it should calculated. Not.
I think we're talking about two different things.
Sure. Nope, same thing. You say only on a start, and I say not only on a start. Under the right circumstances, we do it every single time. And I will look for the code where we do it, or whenever we did it, if it was removed.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about now. The code that I have looked at is the volume manager keeps track of the allocated capacity for every pool. That's the volume manager's job. The driver doesn't do that. And the only time in which, without this patch, that data is accurate is at init host time, because it actually goes through the database and adds up all the values before it says this driver is initialized, and then you can actually start using it. And what the volume manager does not do, it does not correctly track migrated volumes and updating and decrementing for the current host and adding for the remote host, for where the volume is actually migrating from and to. Those two values are incorrect without this patch, as well as some of the other items. So all I'm saying is that the volume manager's job is to track the allocated capacity GB setting, and that gets added to the volume stats when it updates the capabilities to the scheduler. And without this, you will absolutely run into a case where you overcommit with migrations, especially when you start getting to highly utilized pools. And part of the patch in there is to unify, refactor a little bit of the code that does the deltas into a single function, and then has all the places where we're manually doing that throughout the volume manager, calling this method. So that way it's unified. And that's what this patch does as well. Because previously we're, in some cases, not adding correctly and doing different types of operations and not doing proper checks to ensure that the stats are initialized there for a new pool. So this actually fixes some of those issues as well. It's in the update allocated, what's the name of the function? Yeah, underscore update allocated capacity. That's the refactoring of all the places within the volume manager into that one place that keeps track of and manages dealing with those pools not existing, because pools can come and go throughout the life cycle of the volume manager being up as well. So I'm not sure where the discussion is not, or I'm confused about what you're saying, Gorka. Anyway, so as the volume manager starts, it correctly goes through all the volumes and snapshots and creates an initial state of the allocated capacity. And then as time goes on, without this patch in place, that becomes less and less accurate as more and more volumes get migrated because it's not accounted for. And that's really what this patch is all about, underlying all of it, is to ensure that those operations are correctly incrementing and decrementing where necessary the correct deltas for the actions being taken on that particular pool, depending upon whether it's an extend or a migrate or delete group was one of them too. So that way when the scheduler gets its updated stats, they're correct. And it can make good decisions instead of bad ones. And I have this running in production as well. It's been running for a while, and it's actually fixed a lot of our overcommit problems, which we were seeing on the daily. Anyway, that's all I have.
Okay, so I think Gorka surely has some difference of opinion there regarding the capacity being calculated correctly. So yeah, we can, Gorka I think can surely leave a comment there when he has the code he mentioned about capacity being calculated accurately. Okay.
Was there a question or comment about a disagreement to it? Because I don't see it anywhere.
No, I was just summarizing it. Like Gorka is trying to find the place, so he will leave a review comment on the patch,
Okay.
and we can move forward with that.
Yeah, that's fine.